The invitation came through Outlook at 9:03 a.m. Meeting with HR and management, 9:30 a.m., conference room C. No subject line, no context. Just the kind of message that instantly makes your stomach drop. I had been with Ashford and Wells for 15 years. 15 years of early mornings, late nights, building systems from the ground up, mentoring new hires, and fixing messes no one else even noticed until they exploded. I'd missed birthdays, anniversaries, and even my mother's funeral because of this job. And yet, here I was, being summoned like a school kid to the principal's office. I didn't panic. Not because I wasn't nervous, I was, but because something inside me had changed in the past few months. Something quiet, but powerful. As I walked toward conference room C, I passed the espresso machine I had campaigned to get installed. People still called it Rachel's Coffee Bar. I passed the wall where a framed article featured our product launch, a moment I had engineered behind the scenes while my boss, Brian, gave all the interviews. I paused just outside the door, inhaled slowly, and then stepped in. Brian sat at the head of the table, flanked by Karen from HR. Her face wore that perfectly practiced mask of corporate sympathy. Brian didn't even pretend. He leaned back in the chair, fingers steepled like a bad actor in a courtroom drama. "Rachel," he said, voice dripping with rehearsed solemnity. "After 15 years, the company has decided to terminate your position as part of our strategic realignment." Strategic realignment. I almost laughed. The same man who once called me irreplaceable was now using bullet points from a script. Karen slid a manila folder across the table. "Inside, you'll find the details of your severance package," she said. 2 weeks for every year of service, continuation of benefits for 60 days, and access to outplacement resources. I looked down at the folder, then back up at Brian. "I respect your decision," I said gently. No protest. No begging. Just calm acceptance. That alone seemed to knock the wind out of him. He blinked. "We'll need you to pack your things by the end of the day," he added quickly, perhaps unsettled by my composure. "And please return your laptop and badge to IT before 5 p.m. I stood, straightened my blazer, and nodded once. "Of course. Thank you for the opportunity." I didn't linger. I didn't ask questions. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. I walked out of that room with the same dignity I had carried for 15 years. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly suspect, was that 2 hours earlier I had signed the lease for Ashford and Wells' main competitor's new downtown office, a firm I had quietly joined as head of strategic development. 3 months ago, I'd received a message on LinkedIn. A recruiter from Laneway Dynamics had written, "We've been watching your work from afar, Rachel. Would you be open to a conversation?" At first, I dismissed it. Loyalty had been my currency for years, but something had changed. Maybe it was Brian taking credit for my ideas one too many times. Maybe it was the junior exec he'd promoted, his golf buddy, despite my warnings that he lacked technical understanding. Maybe it was just exhaustion. Quiet, gnawing exhaustion from being invisible while others shined with my light. So I had taken the meeting, then another, and another. By the time HR was preparing my termination letter, I had already negotiated a full executive package, equity shares, and the power to assemble my own team at Laneway Dynamics. This wasn't revenge, not yet. This was insurance. I returned to my desk and sat quietly, scanning the office like it was already a memory. People were moving, typing, laughing. The world kept spinning, unaware that one of its axis points was about to shift. "Hey," Olivia from accounting said softly, stopping by my desk. "Are you okay?" I smiled. "Actually, I'm fine. Everything's going to be just fine." The box they gave me was too small. I left half my things behind. Not because I didn't want them, but because I didn't need them anymore. At 4:58 p.m., I handed my badge to a young intern I didn't recognize. She looked startled. "Are you leaving?" "Apparently," I said, offering a small smile. As I walked out of Ashford and Wells for the final time, the fall sun hit just right. Warm, strong, illuminating everything. I looked down at the folder still clutched in my hand. My name printed neatly across the top. Tomorrow, a new nameplate would be printed. Rachel Hayes, Head of Strategic Development, Laneway Dynamics. And Monday? Monday would be interesting. Monday arrived crisp and bright, the kind of autumn morning that feels symbolic, like the universe is offering a clean slate. I stood in front of the mirrored elevator doors in the sleek lobby of Laneway Dynamics downtown headquarters, adjusting the collar of my navy blazer. No company badge yet. Just a sense of calm anticipation and something else. Freedom. As the elevator opened, a receptionist greeted me with a wide smile. "Ms. Hayes, welcome. Mr. Caldwell is expecting you." That was Grant Caldwell, Laneway's CEO, a man with a reputation for being ruthlessly brilliant but also deeply loyal to those who earned his trust. We'd spoken privately several times over the past few months, our conversations candid and layered with mutual respect. I was escorted to the top floor, where a polished glass door bore a plaque that read, "Head of Strategic Development, Rachel Hayes." My name. No one else's. No fine print. Grant stood as I entered his office, hand extended. "Rachel, you have no idea how glad I am that you're finally here." "Thank you for believing in me," I replied, especially before anyone else did. He smiled. "Oh, I didn't just believe in you. I ran the numbers. Your work at Ashford and Wells drove a 19% increase in client retention over the past 5 years. We've been chasing that kind of traction for a decade." He walked me through the office layout, introduced me to my direct reports, and finally led me to the corner conference room where a team of executives sat waiting. I was given a seat at the table. No hesitation, no sideways glances. The meeting began with a presentation on Laneway's upcoming expansion and my role in leading the strategy for client acquisitions, tech integration, and market positioning. And then, just as I started outlining my roadmap for the next quarter, Grant said something that made me pause. "We've also cleared the budget for you to build your own team. We want people who share your vision, people you trust." That was the moment everything shifted. A door opened, not just metaphorically, but tangibly. I had spent 15 years at Ashford and Wells training bright minds, building talent, mentoring without recognition. And when it was time to make cuts, none of that mattered. But now I had the power to change someone else's trajectory, to give back. "Thank you," I said, carefully controlling my voice. I already have a few names in mind. That night, I opened my laptop and typed 6 emails, each one carefully written, respectful, and honest. Subject: A new chapter, let's talk. Each message went to someone I had mentored at Ashford and Wells. Developers, analysts, strategists, people who were overlooked, passed over for promotions, or forced to work under managers who used their ideas as stepping stones. Within 30 minutes, I had 3 responses. By midnight, all 6. "Yes, Rachel. Tell us where and when." On Tuesday, the fallout began. I was sipping coffee in the Laneway lounge when a notification pinged my phone. LinkedIn updates. 4 of my former team members had changed their job status to open to work. The timing wasn't subtle. Neither were the private messages that followed. Brian just called a meeting asking why half the strategy team was suddenly updating their resumes. Karen from HR stopped by my desk and asked if I had spoken to you. I didn't answer. Rumor is they're scrambling to reshuffle teams after losing momentum post-Q3 review. I didn't reply to every message, but I read each one twice. Meanwhile, at Laneway, I began working with our legal and compliance department to finalize contracts for my new hires. Competitive pay, flexible hours, and most importantly, ownership. I made sure each of them would have their names attached to what they built. By Wednesday, Grant pulled me aside. "We just had a client reach out, one we lost to Ashford and Wells last year. They want to reopen discussions." I raised an eyebrow. "Any idea why?" "Not sure," he said, smiling slightly. but they asked if Rachel Hayes would be leading the project. That evening, I received an unexpected text from Brian. "Hey, heard you landed somewhere. Congrats. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long moment. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what he'd done. Just a casual attempt to reconnect now that the power balance had shifted. I didn't reply. Instead, I poured a glass of wine and opened the group chat I'd created with my soon-to-be team. We joked, shared old office stories, and reviewed our plans for the new product line. And then Olivia, the quietest of the group, wrote, "Rachel, you don't know what this means to us. You believed in us before we believed in ourselves. I'm in, 100%. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not pain. Relief. After years of watching others take credit, of being sidelined, minimized, I was finally in a place where my voice mattered. And more importantly, I could make sure theirs did too. This wasn't about revenge. It was about rebuilding, with the right people, in the right way. And as for Brian, well, he'd just started to realize what happens when you fire the wrong person. By the end of my first week at Laneway Dynamics, the atmosphere at Ashford and Wells was beginning to shift, and not in the way their leadership had hoped. The first signs came in the form of silence. The kind that settles over a workplace when people are too afraid to ask questions out loud but are whispering them behind closed doors. On Monday morning, I received a message from Jordan, my former data systems analyst. They pulled everyone into a reassurance meeting this morning. Brian tried to sound confident, but people could tell something was off. Someone asked where you were going, and he dodged the question. By Tuesday, I had confirmation that 2 long-standing clients were reevaluating their contracts with Ashford. They'd reached out through a mutual contact, curious about whether I was involved in any current projects. And if not, why not? I didn't chase them. I didn't have to. The truth was, the work I'd done at Ashford wasn't just technical, it was relational. I had spent years building trust with clients, translating needs into solutions, and delivering under pressure. It turns out people remember that. And people talk. At Laneway, my new team was beginning to form. Olivia had officially accepted her offer and started onboarding. By Wednesday, 2 more had followed. It felt like assembling a dream team, not just based on skill, but on shared values. Every time someone joined, I felt that quiet satisfaction grow stronger. This wasn't just about proving I could land on my feet. It was about lifting others with me. Late that afternoon, as I was reviewing integration plans with the engineering lead, my phone buzzed again. Another LinkedIn notification. Brian had updated his job title. Chief Strategy Officer. I laughed, out loud. There was no announcement, no formal press release. Just a quiet little title change, clearly meant to stabilize perception after my departure. But it reeked of panic. He was scrambling to fill a gap he didn't even fully understand until I was gone. That same night, I got a call from Claire, my old friend in the legal department at Ashford. She sounded hesitant at first, then blurted, "I'm sorry. I didn't know they were going to do that to you." I paused, surprised. "Claire, you don't owe me an apology. You weren't the one who made the decision." "I still feel responsible." She sighed. "They had meetings weeks before your termination. I wasn't looped in until the final HR review. But after seeing the fallout, Rachel, they're spiraling." "Because I left?" "Because they didn't see it coming," she said. "You were the one constant in a sea of turnover. Now Brian is holding meetings every morning and pushing unrealistic deadlines to prove everything is under control." I didn't say anything. Claire continued, her voice lower. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know what you built there. It mattered." Those words stuck with me. By Thursday morning, I was sitting across from Grant in his office, reviewing updates on our first major product launch. The energy in the room was electric. "Early prototypes are outperforming expectations," he said, tapping the table. "We haven't even announced the official launch date, and we already have inbound interest from 2 firms in the financial sector." "That's because our message is clear," I replied. Efficiency, transparency, and credibility. It's what clients want, and what they remember. He looked at me thoughtfully. You know, Rachel, you've done more in 10 days than some executives manage in a year. I smiled, but the compliment brought with it a deeper realization. I hadn't changed. I'd just finally been seen. That afternoon, Olivia stopped by my new office with a coffee in hand. Just the way I like it, black with a dash of cinnamon. I still can't believe it, she said, looking around. You're really the boss now. I laughed. Well, technically Grant is the boss. I just sit in the corner. No, she said softly. You're the one we follow. You always were. The words caught me off guard. I thought back to the nights I stayed late fixing reports Brian had mangled, or the weekends I spent coaching junior analysts for presentations he'd take credit for. I'd wondered back then if it was all for nothing. But it wasn't. Because here I was, building something real. That evening, as I prepared to shut down for the night, I received another message from Claire. You should know, Brian just requested an emergency board session. Internal rumors say he's blaming structural gaps in strategy performance. Also, they've started reaching out to a recruitment firm for a replacement. He's worried. I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed a short reply. He should be, because the dominoes had only just started to fall. By the following Monday, word had officially leaked. Ashford and Wells was in trouble. Not the kind of scandalous, headline-grabbing trouble that made the news, but the slow internal unraveling that executives scramble to spin and employees whisper about over coffee. It started with missed deadlines, then client complaints, and then, worst of all for a company built on perception, silence from leadership. That morning, I was in a product strategy meeting at Laneway, laying out our second phase integration plan, when Olivia passed me a note across the table. Ashford just pulled out of the Tech Forward conference. No announcement. Just gone. I blinked once and tucked the note into my folder. 3 weeks ago, Brian had been slated as a keynote speaker at that very event, a fact he reminded the team of every chance he got. And now, he'd gone completely dark. After the meeting, I stepped into the hallway for a call with Grant. Before I could speak, he jumped in. You've stirred up more movement in the market than I expected, he said with a mix of amusement and awe. 3 of Ashford's mid-tier clients reached out this morning, wanting demos, wanting you. Let's not rush, I said carefully. We'll talk to the ones that are serious. The rest can wait. He paused, clearly reading between the lines. You're not doing this to beat Ashford, are you? I smiled faintly. Number, I'm doing this to build something better. If that means their house of cards collapses along the way, so be it. That afternoon, I got another message, this time from Miguel, a junior developer who had been on the fence about leaving Ashford. Rachel, I think I'm ready. Things are a mess here. They've split your old role between 2 execs, neither of whom understand the systems you designed. Yesterday, they asked me to explain the entire project lifecycle in a 30-minute presentation. I've only been here 8 months. Are you still building your team? I texted back instantly. Yes, let's meet. By Tuesday, Miguel was in my office, looking 10 years older than when I last saw him. I'm not sure how I lasted this long, he admitted, sitting across from me. It's like no one knows who's in charge anymore. Everything feels reactionary, defensive. I nodded slowly. Because that's what happens when leadership is built on control, not collaboration. The moment their system gets disrupted, it collapses. I don't want to survive in that, he said quietly. I want to thrive in something real. You will, I said, sliding a contract toward him. You're not just getting a job, you're getting a voice. His signature hit the paper with a kind of finality, like a thread snapping cleanly from one story to another. By midweek, the cracks at Ashford widened into chasms. A well-placed source forwarded me a company-wide email sent by Brian. We are undergoing a restructuring phase to streamline operations and improve efficiency. We appreciate everyone's continued support during this time of growth and change. The language was pure corporate theater, but the meaning was clear. They were losing control and fast. That night, over drinks with Grant and the CFO, we reviewed early projections for our Q1 performance. If even half of the leads we generated converted, Laneway would experience its strongest growth quarter in 5 years. Rachel, the CFO said, lifting his glass, I think we finally found the missing link. It wasn't missing, I said, raising mine in return. It was just buried. The next morning, I woke to a voicemail from Claire. Her voice was tight, serious. Call me. It's urgent. I called back immediately. She picked up on the first ring. Rachel, she said. It's happening. The board just held an emergency vote. They're removing Brian. I stood, stunned. Not because I didn't see it coming, but because it had happened faster than even I expected. They're naming an interim CEO, external candidate, full audit of leadership strategy. They're trying to salvage the ship before more talent walks. I didn't say anything at first, just closed my eyes and breathed. They never expected this to turn into a movement, I said finally. No, she agreed, but you turned your exit into a blueprint. And now, people are following it. That afternoon, Grant stepped into my office with a gleam in his eye. You've got a lunch meeting with one of Ashford's ex-clients tomorrow. Big one. They said they're not interested in rehashing the past, just interested in what you're building next. Good, I said, because the past doesn't deserve our time. As he left, I glanced at the new project roadmap pinned to my office wall. Clean lines, clear phases, a vision I had once tried to bring to Ashford, only to be told it was too ambitious, too complex, too much, not anymore. Now it was reality. And Brian? He was learning the hard way that people are not replaceable. Influence isn't granted by title. It's earned through trust, through sweat, through showing up. He'd taken my seat at the table for years. Now I was building the whole damn table. By Friday morning, the calls stopped being subtle. Rachel Hayes was no longer a rumor in the industry. She was a movement. Every day brought new messages. Former clients, recruiters, industry peers, even strangers who'd watched from afar. Some wanted jobs. Others just wanted to say, thank you. But the most surprising call came at 10:47 a.m. from a name I hadn't heard in years, Vanessa Carr. Vanessa was one of Ashford and Wells' top-tier clients, the CFO of a massive logistics conglomerate who'd quietly hinted more than once that I was the reason she stayed loyal to the company. Our last conversation, over 2 years ago, ended with a warning. If they ever let you go, I won't be far behind. Her voice now was cool, measured, but layered with something more. Rachel, she said, I've been watching. The shifts at Ashford, your team at Laneway, the new platform. It's impressive. Thank you, I said cautiously. I didn't expect to hear from you. She hesitated. You know me. I don't move unless I have a reason. Here's mine. We're ending our contract with Ashford. I blinked. Seriously? They've lost direction. No leadership. No stability. The new interim CEO is a paper figure and the board is in chaos. They even asked us to delay our quarterly review because they couldn't get the reporting tools to function properly. I could already guess what happened. The systems I'd built had been patched together without understanding. Once they broke, no one knew how to fix them. We're vetting new partners, Vanessa continued, but between us, I want to work with you. I leaned back in my chair, phone against my ear, staring out at the city skyline. I appreciate that, Vanessa, but I don't just take clients anymore. I choose partners, people who respect the value of long-term vision. I'm not asking for a discount, she said. I'm offering something bigger. Come in-house. Lead our transformation team. Executive level. Autonomy. Equity stake, I froze. That wasn't a consulting gig. That was an empire. After the call, I sat in silence for a long moment, weighing the offer. Laneway had given me a platform. Freedom, respect, and space to rebuild. But this This was a whole different level of control, a chance to lead innovation outside of tech silos, to affect not just product, but culture. Still, walking away from Laneway so soon felt premature, especially with my team finally finding their footing. Olivia, Miguel, and the others, they weren't just employees. They were people I'd helped restore, people who had trusted me. I wasn't ready to walk away from them, but I wasn't ready to dismiss Vanessa's offer either. That night, I met Grant for drinks. He greeted me at a quiet rooftop bar with a smirk that told me he already knew something was up. "So," he said, swirling his drink. "Vanessa Carr?" I narrowed my eyes. "How—" "She called me," he said. "Told me she made you an offer." I raised an eyebrow. "And?" "And I told her she's lucky you even picked up the phone," he said smoothly. "But I also told her something else. If you ever wanted to lead a division outside of tech, finance, logistics, infrastructure, I'd back you with every dollar I've got." My stomach flipped. "Grant—" "No, listen," he said. "You rebuilt your life in weeks. You built ours with it. But I know talent like yours doesn't sit still for long. So if this is your next mountain, I won't stop you." I exhaled slowly. "It's not about leaving. It's about building where I'm needed most." He nodded. "And that's what makes you different from the Bryans of the world." The next morning, as I walked into the office, something struck me. There was a weight to every step now. Not pressure, but presence. People stood when I entered. They asked for my input. They listened, not because I demanded it, because I'd earned it. Halfway through my day, Olivia pulled me into a side room. "Just so you know," she said with a grin, "Ashford sent another recruiter after Miguel. Same guy who ghosted me 3 years ago when I applied for an internal transfer." Miguel chuckled from the doorway. Told them I was flattered, then forwarded the email to our group chat. "Nice touch," I said. "You should have seen Brian's face," he added. "He's still lurking in the background. Not CEO anymore, but hanging on." That made me pause. "Brian? He was still at Ashford?" Just then, Claire sent me a message. "Internal rumor. Brian's trying to position himself as head of innovation to justify staying. No one's biting. But watch your back. He's not done trying to salvage his reputation." I stared at the message, then typed back, "He can try. I've got something he'll never understand. A team that follows me willingly. And a future that doesn't need fixing." Because in a few days, Ashford would discover something they weren't prepared for. Their competitor wasn't just hiring. We were expanding. 3 months after I walked out of Ashford and Wells with a cardboard box and a polite smile, I walked into Laneway's executive summit to the sound of a standing ovation. Not because of a speech, not because of a press release, because the new product we launched had just landed our company a multi-million-dollar deal, one Ashford had been chasing for years. We didn't win it with flash. We won it with functionality, with real solutions delivered by a team that had been discarded, underestimated, and ignored. The same team now leading one of the fastest-growing development divisions in the industry. But I didn't need applause. I needed impact. And we were just getting started. Earlier that week, the final domino had fallen. Vanessa Carr had called again. Only this time, not with another job offer. This time, she called to confirm. "We've moved all systems to your team," she said. "The transition was seamless. Honestly, I wish we'd done it sooner." I thanked her, and she paused before continuing. "There's something else," she said carefully. "Brian reached out to us, personally." I didn't speak. I just let her go on. "He offered to consult. Said he could bring unique insights into your process, since he worked closely with you for so many years." Her voice dripped with irony. I laughed softly. "Let me guess. He phrased it like we were partners." "Exactly," she said. But I told him the truth. The only thing he ever contributed was obstruction. And frankly, we're not interested in people who build roadblocks and call them strategy. She hung up with a promise to introduce us to 2 more logistics clients by quarter's end. I sat in silence for a moment after the call, letting it all sink in. Brian wasn't just irrelevant now. He was a cautionary tale. A man who built his empire on the backs of others, and then had no idea how to hold it together once those people walked away. And the irony? He could have been a mentor, a leader. Instead, he'd chosen control. And now no one was listening to him. That Friday, we held our first joint strategy retreat. Not in a sterile boardroom, but at a converted farmhouse an hour outside the city. Sunlight streaming through high windows, whiteboards leaning against brick walls, Post-it notes scattered across rustic tables. The kind of place that invites ideas instead of suffocating them. As we reviewed the upcoming quarter's roadmap, I looked around the room. Miguel was guiding a new intern through our automation workflows. Olivia was fielding client calls with confidence I hadn't seen in her before. Even Claire, who had finally left Ashford for a senior compliance role with us, was smiling in a way she hadn't in years. At one point, someone asked what we should name the new project. I looked at the whiteboard and quietly wrote, Phoenix, because that's what we'd done. We'd risen. On our own terms. That evening, I got an email. No name in the subject line. Just, we made a mistake. I made a mistake. It was Brian. Rachel, I'm not asking for sympathy. I just need you to understand that I was under pressure. The board, the investors, the metrics, they pushed, and I reacted. I see now what I failed to recognize back then. Your work was the foundation of everything we did. And when you left, it all started to collapse. I've lost almost everything, and I can't help wondering what would have happened if I'd just treated you differently. I hope you're doing well. I'm truly sorry. There was a time I would have clung to that apology, turned it over in my mind, hoping it might heal something. But not anymore, because I didn't need closure from him. I had given it to myself. I closed the email and never responded. A few days later, Laneway announced a new internal initiative, the Rachel Hayes Fellowship, an annual program to fund and mentor women in tech who had been pushed out of corporate roles and wanted to start over. The board had voted unanimously. Grant had insisted it carry my name. I was stunned. You built this, Rachel, he said. Not just the systems, the people, the culture. You showed us what leadership actually looks like. For a moment, I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. Not out of modesty, but because it felt right. 1 year after I was terminated without warning, I stood in my office. No longer surrounded by silence, but by movement. Real momentum. A new generation of thinkers and builders who didn't ask for permission to be brilliant. And as I looked out over the city, one last message came in from Miguel. Hey, boss. Client just confirmed. They're leaving Ashford and coming to us. That makes 8. Also, we're going to need a bigger office. I smiled, heart full, no bitterness in sight. Because revenge fades. But legacy? Legacy lasts. Lisa, I want that report on my desk first thing tomorrow. No excuses. It was Sunday, 10:04 p.m. I stared at my phone, still buzzing with the notification. Another message from my manager, Rachel. Of course it was. 3 weeks into my new job and the mask was already slipping. After my husband and I were both laid off last year, I had been desperate for a fresh start. The role I landed at Airden Tech was a step down. Sure, but we had bills to pay, and the hiring manager, Brian, had seemed genuine and kind. At first, the team was great. Supportive. Welcoming. It felt like a new beginning. But then came Rachel. Officially, I was hired as a project liaison between Brian's strategy group and Rachel's product division. But unofficially, I was Rachel's personal punching bag. That became clear very quickly. She'd email me at 9 p.m., call me at 7 a.m. on weekends, ask me to cancel time off, skip lunch, and reframe my documents to match her tone. But the worst part wasn't the workload. It was her tone, her words, her constant cutting remarks. You really should consider dressing for your body type. You're pretty sharp for someone without a technical degree. Brian must have hired you out of pity. I tried to push back, calmly, professionally. That only seemed to provoke her more. Every ounce of assertiveness on my part was met with a fresh storm of passive aggression or outright insults. I stayed. Because I had to. Because our mortgage didn't care about my pride, and we still hadn't recovered from the medical bills after my father-in-law passed. But something broke in me on a Friday afternoon. I had just wrapped up a team sync and scheduled a follow-up meeting without including one of Rachel's junior analysts. I didn't know the guy existed, but that didn't stop her from storming into the open office, voice sharp and loud enough for half the floor to hear. "Do you even know what you're doing, Lisa? Who let you run meetings unsupervised? Honestly, you're an unqualified mess." I froze. People were staring. My hands shook. I walked straight into Brian's office and shut the door behind me. I didn't even sit down. "I can't do this anymore." He looked at me for a long moment, then exhaled. "You're not the first person to say that," he admitted. "She's lost 4 people in 6 months. I was hoping it would work out better this time." He didn't hesitate. By that evening, I was reassigned to his team, officially out from under Rachel's supervision. I felt like I could breathe again. Finally. But it didn't last. The following Monday, I received an email from Rachel with a subject line that just said urgent. Inside were bullet points, tasks, demands, as if nothing had changed. I didn't respond. That Wednesday, she showed up at my desk. "So you're ignoring me now?" she hissed, loud enough for my new team to hear. "Is that how you operate? Play the victim, then pretend you're too good for the job?" Before I could respond, Brian appeared behind her. "Rachel, that's enough." She turned pale, but the damage was done. And still, it didn't stop. She kept emailing, kept circling like a shark that didn't know the meal was over. I tried to focus on my work, but the tension never left. 2 weeks later, I made a decision. I opened a blank document and typed my resignation letter. Simple. Director. But I didn't stop there. I attached a second file, a 3-page document listing every inappropriate comment, every after-hours demand, every documented case of verbal harassment I could recall. Dated, sourced, and clear. And then I hit send, not just to Brian, to HR, to leadership, to Rachel's director. The responses rolled in fast, some shocked, some supportive, some silent. Rachel stayed. I left. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't really gone. Not yet. I had already set something in motion, something she wouldn't see coming until it was far, far too late. The first morning after I quit, I sat at the kitchen table in my robe, staring at a half-empty cup of coffee. My inbox was quiet. No late-night tasks. No urgent subject lines. No Rachel. It felt surreal. But peace has a funny way of turning into panic when there's no paycheck to back it up. We had just enough in savings to cover maybe 2 months of bills if we skipped anything extra. No dinners out, no impulse buys, no margin for surprise. My husband had just started a new job himself, but it barely covered half our monthly expenses. Things were tight, uncomfortably tight. And emotionally, I was drained. Leaving had felt like taking my first breath after nearly drowning. But freedom didn't pay the mortgage. I spent the next 2 weeks applying to anything that seemed remotely relevant. 5 applications a day, sometimes 10. I tailored every resume, rewrote every cover letter. Still, nothing. One afternoon, I was scrolling job boards when a LinkedIn notification popped up. David Montgomery has joined Airden Tech as Chief Strategy Officer. I blinked. David Montgomery? The same David I used to work with 5 years ago at Stratix? The one who once pulled me into a high-visibility project that led to my first promotion? We hadn't spoken in ages, but we had stayed connected loosely. LinkedIn likes here, a random birthday message there. Without overthinking it, I sent him a quick message. "Congrats, David. Hope Airden treats you well. Let me know if you want any insights. I used to be there recently." I hit send and went back to job hunting. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was David. Lisa. Hey, wow, it's been what, 4 years? Closer to 5. I laughed. Feels like a lifetime. We chatted for 20 minutes. I kept it light, but I was honest. Told him I'd been there recently, that the culture had shifted, that certain leaders, without naming names, had caused turnover and morale issues. He asked thoughtful questions. I offered a few ideas on how Erden could modernize their internal systems, how they could reduce redundancy between strategy and product. At the end of the call, he paused. You know, he said, I was going to hire a chief of staff, someone who can help me rebuild from the inside. I wasn't sure where to start looking, but would you consider coming back? I sat in stunned silence. Back to Erden? I finally said. Under you? Yep. You'd be reporting directly to me. I'd make sure your title and compensation match your experience, and, let's be clear, you'd be 2 levels above whoever made your life difficult. I'd want you helping drive culture change, not surviving it. It felt like someone had thrown open a window in a room I hadn't realized was suffocating me. I asked for a day to think, but I already knew. By the next afternoon, the offer letter was in my inbox. Director of Strategic Operations, reporting directly to the CSO. Salary nearly double what I was making before. Full remote flexibility, equity, bonus potential. I accepted. The onboarding moved quickly. And then, just 3 weeks after I had walked out of Erden Tech with a cardboard box and a 3-page resignation letter, I walked back in. This time, through the front doors of the executive wing. David and I agreed to keep my return under wraps until the next all-hands strategy meeting. That gave me time to settle in, review internal documents, and start reconnecting with old contacts who were still at the company. But word travels fast. The day of the announcement arrived. I stood near the back of the large conference room as David took the stage. Before we dive into strategy updates, he said with a grin, I'm thrilled to introduce someone who's going to help us reshape how we think, operate, and lead. I saw heads turn as people scanned the room. Lisa Grant is joining us as our new Director of Strategic Ops. Some of you may remember her. The silence was thick. From the side of the room, I watched Rachel's expression shift. Confusion, disbelief, and then something else. Something sharp. She recognized the name. Then she saw me. Her face dropped. She blinked. Once. Twice. And then quickly looked away. I stood tall, calm, controlled. I smiled. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that this wasn't just a return. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Something she'd never see coming. The silence in the room after David's announcement was deafening. Rachel didn't clap. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply stared at the floor for a beat too long, her face carefully blank. But I saw it. The flicker of panic. The realization that something had shifted, and she had no idea how deep the change went. I didn't approach her that day. I didn't have to. My presence was enough. I knew her well enough to understand that being blindsided publicly would eat away at her far more than any confrontation ever could. The next few days were surprisingly smooth. David brought me into senior leadership meetings. I reviewed team org charts, process breakdowns, and internal communication channels. Every document confirmed what I already suspected. Erden Tech had been bleeding talent for months. Morale was low. Turnover was high. Rachel's name came up repeatedly in exit interviews, often buried between layers of vague corporate phrasing. Leadership misalignment. Lack of psychological safety. Unclear direction with a punitive edge. In plain language, she was toxic, and everyone knew it. But no one had done anything. Not yet. I hadn't come back for revenge. Not exactly. I came back to reclaim my name, my dignity, my career. But if consequences were a natural byproduct of that, I wasn't going to stand in the way. It didn't take long before Rachel tried to reassert herself. 3 days after the all-hands meeting, she sent David an email. A long one. I only knew because he called me into his office and tilted his screen so I could read it. I'm concerned about Lisa's presence here. She used to work for me, and there were issues. She attempted to undermine my authority and left the company on difficult terms. I'm not sure she's suited for a director-level role. Just wanted to raise the concern privately. David raised an eyebrow as I finished reading. I assume this isn't the full story. I kept my tone even. Not even close. I thought so. He opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside was a printed copy of my resignation letter from 3 months earlier, the one I had CC'd to HR, leadership, and Rachel's own director. Attached were pages of documented harassment, complete with dates, timestamps, and direct quotes. She forgot we keep digital records, he said simply. I shook my head. She didn't forget. She just didn't think it mattered. Well, he said, it does. I left his office with a strange calm. Not victorious, not smug, just settled. A kind of validation I hadn't expected to feel. But Rachel wasn't done. She escalated. That Friday, she sent another email, this time to David and the chief people officer. I believe Lisa is using her new position to target me. I've heard from others that she's speaking negatively about me. I'm requesting an investigation into her behavior. It was laughable. I had barely spoken to anyone outside my department. David didn't respond. He just forwarded it to me with a single line. You don't need to reply. HR is already familiar with the context. I thought that would be the end of it. But Rachel couldn't help herself. The following week, during a senior leadership roundtable, she took a subtle dig. We were discussing a cross-functional delay in the product pipeline, something that originated from a lack of collaboration between her team and ours. I explained the gap, tactfully, but clearly. Rachel interrupted me mid-sentence. Maybe you're just not used to managing this level of complexity, Lisa. It's very different from administrative work. The air in the room went still. She had just implied in front of 4 VPs that I wasn't qualified to be at the table. And she did it with a smile. I didn't flinch. Instead, I leaned forward, met her gaze, and said, I agree, Rachel. Managing complexity requires collaboration. That's why I've spent the last week interviewing your former staff. None of them felt they could speak up when they were under your management. I'd be happy to share the anonymized insights with you. Her smile vanished. David spoke up next. That would be helpful, Lisa. Please compile those findings into a report and send them my way. Rachel, we'll schedule a follow-up meeting to go over next steps. Rachel didn't respond. Her posture stiffened, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The meeting moved on, but the tone had shifted. She had tried to cut me down and exposed her own leadership failures instead. Later that day, David called me into his office again. I want to ask you something, he said. Off the record, do you think Rachel is still the right fit for this organization? I hesitated. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wanted to get it right. I think she was given every chance to change, and she chose not to. What happens next is up to leadership. But if you're asking whether she's a culture risk, yes, she is. David nodded. That's what I thought. He didn't say more, but the look in his eyes told me everything. Rachel's time was running out, and she didn't even know it yet. Rachel didn't speak to me for a full week after the roundtable. No emails, no passive-aggressive comments, just silence. But silence, when it comes from someone like Rachel, isn't peace. It's pressure. Pressure building behind a closed door. You don't know when it'll blow, but you know it's coming. I focused on my work. The strategy alignment project David assigned me had ballooned into a cross-departmental overhaul. I was meeting with team leads from engineering, data, marketing, and ops, and everywhere I went, I heard the same refrain. We've been afraid to say this before, but people started opening up to me about how they'd been shut down in meetings, about missed promotions, about late-night phone calls, demeaning language, mental health leaves, and quiet resignations. Almost every trail led back to Rachel. One afternoon, I got coffee with Jenna, one of Rachel's former analysts who had resigned shortly after I did. We hadn't spoken since I left the company. She looked surprised to see me in the executive wing. "Wait, you're back?" she asked. "Director of Strategic Operations," I said, trying not to smile too wide. Her eyebrows lifted. "Good. You deserve it." She hesitated, then leaned in. "You know she told people you got fired, right? After you left." I blinked. "She said you weren't cut out for the job, that she had to clean house." I didn't believe her, but she said it more than once. I exhaled slowly. "Thanks for telling me. She's not well, Lisa. You know that, right?" "I know." That conversation solidified something I had already started. I began formally documenting, not for revenge, for accountability. Every complaint I heard, every story, every time Rachel inserted herself into someone else's workflow, undermined their authority, or retaliated subtly when she felt threatened. I logged it. David encouraged it. Quietly. He never said the words "build a case," but he didn't have to. The writing was on the wall. Then, one morning, it happened. David forwarded me an email. Subject line, "Concerns regarding Lisa Grant." From Rachel, again. This time she'd gone full tilt. The message was 4 paragraphs long. She accused me of trying to sabotage her, said I was using my position to poison perception of her leadership, that I was obsessed with discrediting her, and had been trying to get her fired since I came back. David's note at the top was short. "Thought you'd want to see this. I've already forwarded it to HR." And beneath it, another email. From the Chief People Officer. "Thanks, David. We've seen a pattern. 5 complaints in the last year, all similar in tone. We'll move forward with the formal review." 5 complaints. I sat back in my chair. This was happening. Still, I kept quiet. I showed up to work. I led meetings. I delivered results. I didn't let her presence or the rumors she kept spinning derail my work. And that made her spiral harder. The day the company's quarterly newsletter went out, Rachel crossed a line she couldn't uncross. In the middle of a thread on company-wide leadership transitions, there was a short profile. "Lisa Grant, our new Director of Strategic Operations, brings over a decade of cross-functional leadership to Airden Tech. A returning face to the company, Lisa is known for her commitment to integrity, inclusivity, and operational excellence." I didn't write that. I didn't even know it was coming. But it set her off. That afternoon, David sent me a message. "You need to see this." Attached was another email Rachel had sent, to the CEO this time. "Lisa is manipulating internal communications. She doesn't deserve a leadership spotlight. She has no technical background and was previously managed out of her role. I'm concerned about the message this sends." The CEO didn't respond to her, but HR did. 2 days later, Rachel was placed on administrative leave. They didn't tell her why, but she knew. Because the day after she left, I found a sticky note on my office door in shaky handwriting. I hope this was worth it. No signature, just spite. And still, no apology. But I didn't need one. Because for the first time in over a year, I felt stillness. A weight lifted. Rachel was out. The investigation wasn't over, but it had begun in earnest. I walked into that Friday's leadership sync knowing the storm had passed. And I was still standing. Not just standing, leading. And for the first time, people were listening. Rachel was gone. Not officially. Not yet. But her sudden administrative leave had turned more than a few heads. Whispers trickled through the halls. People speculated, but no one said her name aloud in meetings. It was like she'd become a ghost overnight. Present only in the wreckage she left behind. I'd love to say I didn't care, that I'd moved on, that I was above it. But I'd be lying. Because when someone's words have lived rent-free in your head for months, words that told you you were stupid, unqualified, ugly, replaceable, it takes more than one suspension notice to evict them. Even now, I'd occasionally catch myself flinching when my phone buzzed after hours, expecting another one of her impossible demands. But this time, it wasn't her. It was David. Quick chat this afternoon? I met him in his office at 2 o'clock. The blinds were half drawn, the air thick with something unsaid. He gestured for me to sit. I wanted to give you an update before you hear it elsewhere. He slid a printed document across his desk. It was a formal summary from HR's investigation. Dozens of employee interviews, written statements, evidence logs, and Rachel's name at the center of it all. She's not coming back, he said, his voice calm. We've decided to terminate her contract. Effective immediately. I blinked. Not because I was surprised, but because it was real. Finally, undeniably real. David continued. We discovered that she had been recording private team meetings without consent. She also deleted project files out of spite when she was reassigned from key initiatives. But the worst? She tried to sabotage your onboarding. He handed me another document, an email, this one uncovered from her work archive, to internal communications. Subject, director profile, request for revisions. Please reconsider highlighting Lisa Grant in the newsletter. She's not respected by the team and has a history of insubordination. Elevating her might undermine leadership credibility. It was dated a week before the newsletter went out. She had actively tried to rewrite my reputation behind the scenes. David shook his head. She underestimated how many people were ready to speak up this time. Her entire former team provided written statements. And your resignation letter? It's being used as a training case in HR now. I sat back in my chair, the weight of it all pressing down. She was gone. She couldn't touch me anymore. But the scars? They hadn't vanished. Later that day, I found myself in the break room alone, staring into my coffee like it held answers. Brian walked in, the manager who had originally hired me, the one who'd tried to protect me even when his hands were tied. He smiled gently. Heard the news? I nodded. You earned this, Lisa. The way you handled yourself, not many could have done it. I looked at him. Do you ever wonder why she lasted as long as she did? He didn't hesitate. Because people were afraid, and because no one in power wanted to deal with the mess. Until you. I didn't respond right away. Because the truth is, I had been afraid too. Terrified. But fear had eventually turned into something else. Resolve. Maybe even courage. Over the next week, cleanup began. Projects Rachel had derailed were reassigned. Former employees reached out to say thank you. For speaking up. For not letting her win. Some even asked if they could return now that the atmosphere had changed. And it had changed. There was a lightness in the office now. A sense of permission. Permission to ask questions. To challenge ideas. To not walk on eggshells. Still, one final surprise was waiting. On Monday morning, I opened my inbox to find an email forwarded from David. It was from Rachel. Subject, exit process. Before my departure is finalized, I want to lodge a formal objection. Lisa Grant manipulated the situation to get rid of me. She's unqualified and vindictive. I will be pursuing legal options. I read the message twice, and then I laughed. Because what she didn't realize, what she never understood, was that power built on fear crumbles the moment people stop being afraid. I forwarded it to legal with a simple note. Please see attached. Happy to provide any documentation you need. By the end of the day, legal responded. Thank you, Lisa. Based on the volume of evidence and third-party reports, we're confident in our position. No further action required. No further action. That phrase echoed in my mind, not just because the case was closed, but because for the first time in over a year, I could finally breathe without waiting for the next blow. Rachel's story at Erden was over. A month had passed since Rachel's termination. Her name no longer came up in meetings. Her picture was removed from the internal org chart. Her office, once a space people entered with dread, had been quietly reassigned to a new hire. Someone kind, collaborative, human. The fear she had ruled with? Gone. But the shift didn't just live in the org chart or team meetings. It was in the way people stood taller, spoke more freely, and dared to raise concerns without bracing for retaliation. It was in the way I started sleeping again. No 10 p.m. texts, no acid in my stomach before Monday mornings, no second-guessing my own worth. I had found my voice, and I wasn't giving it up. A few weeks later, David called me into his office. He smiled as I sat down and handed me a sleek invitation envelope. I opened it and read, Women in Leadership Annual Summit, Panel Invitation Topic, Resilience and Reinvention, Stories from the Front Lines, featuring Lisa Grant, Director of Strategic Operations, Airden Tech. I looked up, stunned. You submitted my name? David nodded. Actually, one of your former colleagues did. HR passed along your resignation letter to them as a case study. They were so impressed, they reached out directly. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry. Me. The woman who once cried in her car after Rachel called her a waste of a salary. Now being asked to speak about resilience. I said yes. The day of the summit, I stood backstage in a crisp navy suit, my hands lightly trembling. Not with fear, but energy, anticipation. A full room of professionals waited just beyond the curtain. Some probably facing the same battles I had barely survived. I took a breath and stepped onto the stage. The spotlight warmed my skin. The mic in my hand felt oddly natural. Good morning, I began. I want to tell you a story, not because it's unique, but because it's far too common. The room went still. I was once called unqualified by a manager who feared I might outshine her. I was told to work through weekends, to cancel vacations, to be small. I did the work. I stayed silent. Until I couldn't anymore. I scanned the crowd. Hundreds of eyes locked on me. I wrote a resignation letter. Not to burn bridges, but to leave a trail. I documented everything. Every insult, every overreach, every ounce of disrespect. A quiet hum of agreement rippled through the room. And for a while, I thought that would be the end of my story. But it wasn't. A door opened. A chance to return. This time, with power. With a voice. And when I saw the person who once humiliated me, I didn't lash out. I did something much harder. I paused. I stayed steady. I let the truth speak. I did the work again. And this time, people listened. The applause began softly, then grew. But I wasn't finished. I'm not here to tell you that justice always comes quickly. It doesn't. I spent nights eating toast for dinner because we couldn't afford groceries. I applied to 20 jobs a day with no replies. I doubted everything about myself. I let the words land. But I'm also not here to tell you to stay silent, to wait for someone else to fix it. Because the truth is, your voice matters. Even when it shakes. Especially when it shakes. I smiled then. For real. I stand here today not as someone who won, but as someone who refused to lose. When the panel ended, people approached me with tears in their eyes. One young woman whispered, "Thank you. I've been afraid to speak up, but now I think I can." That moment, that sentence, meant more than any title ever could. A few weeks later, Airden Tech announced a new company-wide policy on workplace culture, developed in collaboration with HR and me. It included stronger reporting procedures, anonymous feedback tools, and leadership accountability tracking. The company even introduced a quarterly workshop titled The Cost of Silence: How to Spot and Stop Toxic Leadership. They asked me to help design the first one. I did. Not for revenge. Not to relive the past, but so no one else would have to. 1 year after my return, I sat in my office, the real one with glass walls and a skyline view, and reviewed a resume from a candidate applying to join my team. At the bottom of her cover letter, she had written, "I read about your story in last year's Leadership Summit. It changed the way I advocate for myself." Thank you, I leaned back, eyes stinging. Rachel was a chapter. But I was the author now. And my story? It was just beginning.